Hello and welcome. My name is John Valentine and welcome to this class where I'll be talking about how to edit your writing, 6 tips to becoming a better writer and a better editor of your writing. So about me a little bit, I have a degree in creative writing and I've been a freelance graphic designer and writer, copywriter for years now. So I have written hundreds of thousands of pieces of content in all different variations. In this course, I'm going to be breaking down exactly on how you can be, a better writer and editor of your product. So let's look at some of the units that I'll be talking about here. First of all, I'm going to be talking about being a writer. Then I'm going to be talking about using a different program, reassessing your word use, using hyperlinks, talking to yourself, word definitions, and at the end, of course, talking about being careful with absolutes. And you can click around in all these topics, but of course the best way to consume this content is just to sit back and watch it all the way through, and at the end I will be giving you some final tips and tricks and a summary of this class. So thank you so much for joining me today, and let's get right into this first topic here. So let's talk about being a writer. Well, of course you know what being a writer is like, but sometimes people forget that being a good writer also means being a good editor. When you finish a product, it's not just finished and there it is. Editing is almost just as important as the actual writing part. Editing greatly is what separates the good writers from the great writers. So you can have good writing, you can write your piece of content, look through it, no mistakes, and move on with your day. But really paying attention to your own work is what separates the amazing pieces from the good ones. So of course these are for the more and bigger part pieces of writing, not for an Instagram caption, but for blog posts, copywriting, content writing, essays, whatever it is. But being a good writer for big pieces and just in general good pieces of content requires you to look through it with a fine comb and really double check everything, not just spelling mistakes that most softwares can sniff out nowadays, but really going through it, asking yourself if this is the best way to convey the information that you want to convey. So being a good editor means being a good writer, and that's where really separates the amazing pieces. So go through it, double check your word use, double check the spelling and everything, even though your Microsoft Word says there's no red lines under it and no spelling. Make sure to double check your spelling, double check your word use, maybe read your sentences, be like, man, actually I could use it like, structure the sentence like this. When you look at your syntax, everything. Look at the way that you use commas and periods and whatever semicolons that you use. So really look through it very finely, read each sentence like it's worth gold, and make sure that your writing is up to perfection and everything you do. Of course, relative to whatever you're creating. If you're getting paid $5 to create a 100-word thing, maybe don't spend 8 hours editing and re-editing your piece of content. But I think when being relative and spending the right amount of time on a piece of content is needed. But again, even if it's just as simple as rereading it once or twice and really making sure that everything you said is everything that you want to say and everything that you need to say. So just keep in mind that being a good writer means being a good editor. So the next tip would be using a different program, and this is a little bit of a unique tip and maybe not something that everybody wants to do, but if you want to look at your piece of writing in a different way, copy and paste your article or whatever piece of writing that you're doing and paste it into a different writing software. If you use Microsoft Word, copy and paste it into a Google Doc. If you're using Google Doc, copy and paste it into whatever it is, Pages or whatever Apple's version is. And you can really look at it sometimes in a little bit of a different way. Reread it in that program. First of all, sometimes actually their software will detect other things. Some things like Grammarly, if you use an online editor, can sometimes work way different than a Microsoft Word, autocorrect, and so on. So really look at that and digest your product in a different way. It can really make you look at it differently, and they work differently. So it is just a little technique that you can use in order to sometimes look at at your writing in a little bit different way, which will make you see like, okay, well, now that I see it in a different font, now that I see it on a different background, instead of light mode, I use dark mode, and then I look at it like this. Sometimes, okay, this sentence actually doesn't look that good. Maybe I should separate these paragraphs, whatever it is. It can just help look at it in a different light. It seems like a silly tip, but you can try it out and see if it works for you. I've used this every now and then, and I actually really like it, especially for longer pieces of writing. So it is definitely a great tip that you can consider when creating your pieces of writing. So the next tip would be reassessing your word use, and this is an important one, especially because I think as a writer, if if you're listening and you've done a lot of writing, maybe you're just starting out, but if you have done writing here and there, we all have our favorite words, especially if you read a lot. If you read a lot of books, you can sometimes, I bet if you read a lot and you have your favorite author, even if you don't know that book is written by that author, you could probably tell which book is written by what author. And if you get 3 different books by 3 different authors, all authors that you really like, and you've written a lot of the work, I bet you could see which writer belongs to which piece of writing, because some people all have their different style. People have their favorite words. People have specific phrasing that they use, and so sometimes that can get in the way. Of course, it is very good because it can be your unique factor, and if you're good at it, then it's great. But sometimes it can be get in the way because people overuse them, or maybe other words can be used better. So not just your favorite words, but just in general, reassessing your word use. People sometimes use maybe filler words like that, whatever, etc., and so on. Like I said, and so on, more than others, and sometimes that can seem like that writing can be stretched in different ways. So see if you can change or even improve your word usage. One of the best things that I would recommend is having a thesaurus next to you. And no, you don't need a book. If you're writing on a laptop, just go to thesaurus.com and type in any word, especially if it's a word that's repeated within within 1 or 3 sentences. If you say this is worldwide, and then the next sentence you say, oh, the worldwide company, well, you probably don't want to use that word 3 times in the same paragraph. So big words like that, of course you can use that. Filler words like that, you have to use that. But big words that stand out, such as worldwide or phenomenal, especially words that describe things, you don't want to use the same descriptive word 8 times in a row in the same 2 or 3 sentences. So use the thesaurus. It's the best tip that I can give you when reassessing your word use if you want to switch out words. And that again comes in when you edit your work. A lot of the times you only see that once you read through it once or twice. You say, oh, okay, I used that word 4 times within 8 sentences. Maybe I should use a different word once or twice even. And so that all can come out once you again edit your work multiple times. You'd be like, actually, instead of using this word, let me use this word. Oh, I don't know a good replacement for that word, and then you go to the thesaurus, type in that word, and then more often than not you get a great different replacements for that word, and that works just as fine, and sounds way better because it is a little bit more diverse in terms of word use. So reassess your word use, and of course go through it very carefully when editing. Now, this next tip is specifically for online articles and blog posts, not for your actual writing, but more for almost like marketing and, just for using actual writing in an article or a blog or whatever it is, and that is using hyperlinks. And of course, if you don't know, hyperlinks are basically links that you can click on that lead you to another web page. And in articles and in blog posts, often they are highlighted blue and they're underlined. And when it comes to creating blog posts, you don't want to overdo them with hyperlinks because it makes the pieces look ugly and crowded, and also it can take away from the attention from the 1 or 2 hyperlinks that you can actually people want you to click on. If it's really necessary, link it, shorten the anchor text, which is the text that is on there, and then shorten the text and link it to it and get on with it. But don't create a hyperlink every second sentence or paragraph. Definitions in here and there, if they're really needed, go for it. But especially if you want to drive traffic to other websites, they can be very, very beneficial, especially if you don't overdo them. Just think about it. If you have 20 links in a blog post with 500 words, well, how often do you think people are going to click on all 20 links? But if you have one hyperlink at the bottom, or one with anchor text at the bottom, and people are more likely to click on it, or if they have one highlighted article right in the middle of your paragraph with anchor text, well, then they're more likely to click on that. So definitely think about using hyperlinks with anchor text wisely. And again, this is mostly for online articles, blog posts, and all you online writers out there. So definitely something to keep in mind when creating content for your online websites and whatever it is. Now back to the actual content of your writing. The next tip would be talking to yourself. Yes, talking to yourself means reading your article out loud. This strategy, everybody's probably been told this strategy since elementary school, and that's because it works. Reading things out loud sometimes sounds way different than it does in your head, and reading out loud makes it more obvious as to how it sounds to other people, especially if it's a writing that actually gets spoken out loud. Then you have to read it out loud and see what it looks like. But even just reading content that people read, sometimes they say it in their head and their voice way differently than you write it, because you're used to it. It's your writing, and you know how it should sound, and you know what you're trying to say. But assume that everybody else doesn't have all that context and all that information that you already have because you're writing it. And so reading it out loud can often really show the meaning and the actual what you're actually saying. And you can also just hear other things like long sentences, typos, unnecessary words, etc. If you're reading out loud and you hear a long sentence, you're like, okay, I just spoke for 5 seconds and that was one sentence. That was way too long. Or maybe you use words, you say things like that, or use big words like I said before, and you use them twice in a sentence. You're like, okay, I just said that word 3 times. It sounds way too repetitive. And you hear that way more easily if you read it out loud. So whatever it is you're creating, print it out, read it out loud, or just read it from your laptop, whatever it is you're using to write. Maybe you're using a pen and pencil, which is also amazing. Then just read it out loud, talk to yourself, and again, trust me, it will make a lot of sense, and it will sound sometimes way different than what you think it sounds like. So reading your article or your piece of writing, whatever it is, your essay, out loud is a huge strategy that you need to utilize. Now another tip would be to double check your word definitions and looking up word definitions if you're not 100% sure, especially if you use a thesaurus. Like I said, sometimes even though they're synonyms and you can use a thesaurus, sometimes in that context actually they mean something different. So double check your word meanings. You definitely don't want to be the guy that uses a difficult word just to sound smart, and then it is used in the wrong way. So that would be, first of all, embarrassing, and it just makes your writing look lazy and makes your writing look very like it's trying too hard. So use word definitions in the specific way that they're meant to be used. You want to use words how they should be used, and you don't want to use words just for the sake of using that word because it sounds cool, but then it's placed completely in the wrong way. So you definitely want to reconsider using some of your words. Having word variation, of course, as well. Again, using a thesaurus is always great, but be careful when using a thesaurus because, like I said, as we all know, a lot of words can have a lot of different meanings, no matter depending on what context they're in, depending on what combination of words they're in, and even if they look like they're a synonym, especially if you go on that website, you can see that sometimes words can mean something different if they're an adjective than if they're a verb, if they're a noun. So making sure that what you're using them as and what definition they have in that context is correctly done, and that is of course also very, very important when it comes to creating efficient and effective and very just bulletproof, amazing writing. So definitely that's something to double check. Now, the next important tip, especially for content that is and writing that is being consumed by a lot of other people, such as articles, blog posts, copywriting, all kinds of content, is being careful with absolutes. And what I mean by absolutes, that is words that are absolutes, such as never, have to, must, always, absolutely, all those kind of words that have a very strong absolute definition. And that is because it can really set things in stone, and sometimes that can be dangerous for a couple of reasons. First of all, it can sometimes make you seem like you're too passionate about a topic. Of course, oftentimes that can be a good thing, being passionate, but sometimes it can seem off like you're very biased. If you're writing about a certain specific topic, especially if it's news-based or a public opinion and stuff like that, if you use specific absolute words, sometimes it can come off like you're dismissing one side, and you're so close-minded on that one side that people dismiss it immediately because it looks like you're unintentionally giving the wrong, information to people, or it looks like you're giving information that is too biased. So you definitely want to not use too many absolutes. Of course, you can use them here and there sparingly and correctly, but be careful with using them, because that is the important part. So sometimes it can also undermine your writing. For example, if you have specific predictions or things like, oh, this always happens. Absolutely, if this happens, well, this must be true. Well, it doesn't always have to be true if it's something that is not scientifically proven to be true, and then people will be like, well, this guy doesn't even know what he's talking about if he says it always must happen. So be careful with using absolutes, because it puts you in a specific position, and so it can make you look less credible, it can make you seem too biased, and it can set things in stone, and sometimes people don't like that, or it leaves you open and leaves it very vulnerable to specific, opinions and people's, and of course their dislikes and likes, and whatever their concerns and thoughts about what you're writing on. So definitely something to consider when creating content, and especially if you're creating content for a lot of people to consume, such as articles, copywriting, social media content, and so on. So just to round up, I'm going to give you some final tips and tricks, and just give you some, a conclusion, some summary of the topic. One of the things I also want you to consider is that honestly, you can always improve, and that should not be a bad thing. That should be a good thing. And of course, sometimes it can be a bad thing because it seems like you may never be finished. But don't give yourself too much pressure in that aspect as well, because sometimes finished is better than perfection, especially if you're, writing on a deadline, if you're writing for someone else, or even if you're writing for your own deadline. But most of the time, finished is better than perfection if you are on a deadline. If you want to finish a specific piece of content, you can reread it 1,000 times, and you can always find one word that you might want to be different. And also sometimes if you reread it 1,000,000 times, you stray far away from the original message that you wanted to intend. Sometimes your first thought is the correct one, and so of course I say edit your writing, but also, as with all things in life, don't overdo it, because you can always improve, but always wanting to improve can sometimes be a bad thing, because it means you're second guessing your own writing. You're like, okay, well, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do this, and by the time you finish it, well, it just looks too forced as well, because you use the thesaurus for your every third word, and then it just looks like a dictionary threw up on your piece of paper. So definitely keep that in mind as well. Again, some final tips: reconsidering your word use and your just overall words, using different programs to look at it in a different light, and of course, a good basic tip: reading it out loud to make sure how it sounds, and how your syntax, and how whatever your word use, and how your long sentences, if you find any mistakes like that, or typos, stuff like that, can be easily found with reading it out loud. So definitely a good tip to keep in mind. But yeah, that's basically been it. Becoming a better writer, and editing your work. Again, one of the best tips that I would take away from the class is being a good writer means being a good editor, making sure that your work is up to par. But again, don't overdo it, just like with everything in life. But thank you so much for joining me today. This has basically been it. I have some great big news. I am creating a online newsletter, a weekly newsletter with all things digital marketing, social media tips and trends, big news, and everything like that. So make sure to sign up for that. The link is in my profile, or you can also just go to tinyurl.com/weeklyval and just click on that and sign up. And make sure to get that newsletter every week. It only takes 5 minutes to read, and you will get some great information. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to see you in the next class. Goodbye.